Uh, my name is Brian Morris Stedman. I was born in Greymouth in 1920 and lived there, of which I can't remember much about Greymouth. My father, who was a professional soldier in the army, was transferred from Greymouth to Christchurch in 1926. We moved into a new house in Perry Street on our move to Christchurch. And I lived in that house, apart from the war years and a few months after the war, until I moved into Margaret Stoddart. So I lived in that house for 87 years. My father was a professional soldier who stayed in Christchurch until he retired, just at the end of the war. And in his last year or so in the army, he was camp commandant at Burnham. My father in World War I was served in France with the New Zealand Rifle Brigade, which must have been a unit of terrific morale and esprit de corps. And in France he won the Military Cross. And he posted back to New Zealand at the end of the war and stayed in the army until he retired from his period at Burnham, where he was camp commandant, and retired just at the end of the war. My mother, who is a keen gardener and a keen sportswoman, she played tennis right through till relatively, I couldn't tell you the age, but she'd be well into her 60s or 70s when she stopped playing tennis. Possibly was her enthusiasm for tennis rubbed off on me, because I played tennis until I stopped when I was about 84, 85. I played most of my tennis at what was the Hagley Park, now the Hagley Park Tennis Club, and that much again, that's changed its name, it's now the Tikura Hagley Park Tennis Club. In my day it was just known as the United Lawn Tennis Club. And I was involved not only with playing tennis, but I was also on the committee, and in fact I was president, I think, for about 24 years, I'm not sure of the exact number. And I was also responsible for the grounds maintenance we had 5 rows of grass tennis courts in those days, and they were of very good quality. And when I retired, I used to assist the groundsman, and that was reflected in the condition of the tennis courts.
And I think they'd named a pavilion after you, didn't they?
Ah, yes, yes.
And is that still standing?
Yes, yes.
Good.
I was primary school, I went to Waimari School, down the bottom of Hawthorne Street and over the railway line to the school grounds. Yeah, but one of my problems at school was that in the winter time I used to spend quite a bit of time absent from school because of sickness. And for that reason my mother organised me to go as a boarder to Nelson College, for which I was up there for 5 years. And that was a very important part of my life, really, was the knowing a very high standard of masters there. Well, I moved to Nelson as a boarder from 1934 to 38. Of course, Nelson had that very serious earthquake and parts of some of the buildings at Nelson College were dismantled, while the others, there were two new up-to-date boarding hostels built post-earthquake. The standard of teaching of Nelson was very high, and that was reflected in the performance of quite a few Nelson ex-pupils would go on to university, and a popular one to go from Nelson, of course, was to go to Christchurch, to the Canterbury University, where they had possibly above average performance compared with other schools, although there was some of the other schools had some very bright people too. While at Nelson and continuing at later years, tennis was my main interest. I was for a secondary school where rugby was very much the king, and being in the first 15 would be more important than being a master at college, and they would be senior to say a junior master. But say I didn't play rugby because I was hopeless. When I left Nelson, I moved to Christchurch, and of course we'd only been at Canterbury for a few months and World War II started, and I was able to finish my bachelor's degree, and after that I joined the Air Force and was trained as a weather forecaster, a meteorologist, and which was technically quite demanding, and the standard of meteorology, of course, has improved markedly since 1940 to 45. It's still a science where there's still room for improvement, shall we say. I came back after World War II and did a master's degree in chemistry, and that was a bit of a struggle, particularly after not having to do heavy swatting as I had to do for my master's degree, and doing a thesis and a swatting all in 1 year. The normal time to take the what was a master's degree would be 2 years, but the ex-servicemen who came back did it in 1 year, and that was quite difficult. From there I was going back to, I had been to 1 or 2 laboratories, industrial laboratories, and when I finished my master's degree, I was got a job with the Shell Oil Company in Wellington, and I was only there 6 months, and I got an offer to come back to Christchurch to another laboratory where I'd been there during the long students' vacations, and they made an offer I couldn't refuse. So I came back to Christchurch, and that's why I've lived in as I previously mentioned, in the house for about 87 years. In my time with the New Zealand Refrigerating Company, as it was known in those days, was a very interesting company to work for because of its size, and the company was slaughtered sheep, and particularly lambs and cattle and calves, and that during the late, it would be probably in the mid-50s, the hygiene standards were raised to meet some of the demands which originated in some of the export countries or some of the countries we exported to, and that took quite a bit of time in the laboratories, where we would be altering procedures to raise the hygiene standards. Also, at much the same time, demands for the getting rid of the waste products from the meat industry was very important, and the high standards for disposing of the offal and of some of the unwanted parts took quite a bit of time, or some of the standards had to be raised so that the rivers and seashores didn't just receive the unwanted bits.
And what was your function, Brian, in the works? What was your actual job title, shall we say?
I was the chief chemist.
Mm-hmm. And how many people worked with you?
Well, in the Islington laboratory there would be 3 or 4 or 5 people. In the other laboratories you might consider to be satellite laboratories, they probably had 2 or 3 staff, which would include a graduate usually.
And did this job require you to do any overseas travel at all?
Yeah, well, it was really the industry. Was my position is in the industry, representing the meat industry in a combined meeting, which was really reflecting all types of food developments. And I had 2 trips to Denmark to attend conferences with all sorts of people. Some of them, some very highly skilled technical people in microbiology, some in chemistry. There was quite a big number there. My mother would be assisting with these at St Paul's Church, assisting in the vestry, although she was not a member of the actual vestry. And she continued supporting the church for a while, right up until she died. And her younger years she was raised up and lived in the Motueka Valley, up by where the Dove River flows into the Motueka River, and lived with her parents on a farm, the consequence of which she was very conscious of working with animals, horses and dogs, and they would be she would make a great mental contact with them. And I think that's about all we can.